Racist cop arrests black woman, then learns she's a judge. The parking lot of the grocery store shimmered under the mid-afternoon Georgia heat, the kind that made the blacktop look like it was breathing. Officer Kyle Brenner squinted beneath his sunglasses, a bead of sweat sliding down his temple as he watched the black Mercedes coupe ease into a parking spot near the front. Tinted windows, out-of-state plates, and, what caught his eye more than anything, a black woman stepping out, wearing a tailored beige blazer and crisp slacks, heels clicking confidently across the pavement. He muttered to himself, "Doesn't look like she belongs in that kind of car." Brenner reached for the radio on his chest. "Dispatch, I'm going to do a 10 to 50 on a suspicious vehicle at the Elmwood Plaza lot. Out-of-state tags. Possible 10 to 62. Stolen vehicle." No actual report had come through. No alerts. But that didn't stop him from walking over, one hand already resting near his holster. "Ma'am," he said sharply, approaching the woman as she opened the car's trunk to retrieve her handbag. "I need you to step away from the vehicle." She turned, brows raised in calm surprise. "Is there a problem, officer?" He didn't answer right away, scanning the interior through the open door. "This your car?" "Yes," she replied, enunciating each word clearly. "I'll need to see your license, registration, and proof of ownership. Now." The woman blinked, measured in her reaction. "I'm sorry, on what grounds?" "Suspicion of a stolen vehicle." "Step away from the car." Something shifted in her expression. Not fear, not confusion, a kind of steeled familiarity, like she'd been here before. "Are you seriously arresting me for driving my own car?" she asked, tone flat. Brenner took a step closer. "Ma'am, failure to comply will result in escalation. Do not resist." He reached for her wrist. And just like that, what should have been an ordinary grocery run had turned into a full-blown arrest on the hood of her own car. But what Officer Brenner didn't know, what would soon ripple through the department and beyond, was that the woman he just handcuffed wasn't just any black woman in a Mercedes. She was Judge Talia Monroe, and this was going to be the biggest mistake of his career. Judge Talia Monroe sat silently on the edge of the cold metal bench, her hands still cuffed behind her. The holding room at the precinct smelled of stale sweat and cleaning solution, equal parts neglect and forced sanitation. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering just enough to fray nerves. Officer Brenner stood at the booking desk, scribbling onto a clipboard like a man who had already convinced himself he was right. His confidence reeked of arrogance. He didn't even glance her way as he spoke to the desk sergeant. Possible auto theft. No valid documents. Out-of-state tags. She was non-compliant. Talia tilted her head slightly, watching him. Her blazer was wrinkled now, a scuff on the knee of her slacks from when he'd shoved her to the ground. Still, she sat upright, composed, regal, even in this humiliation. The sergeant, an older man with tired eyes, gave her a longer look than Brenner had. "She give you her ID?" "She said it was her car," Brenner said, dismissive. "No registration in the glove box. Had a fancy briefcase, though. Probably stolen." The sergeant raised an eyebrow. "You checked the VIN?" "Didn't need to." Brenner puffed his chest. "You can tell when something's off." The sergeant didn't respond right away. Instead, he walked around the desk and unlocked the cuffs from Talia's wrists, his voice low. "Ma'am, do you have your identification on you?" Talia nodded, calmly reaching into the inner pocket of her blazer with the grace of someone who'd handed over credentials 1,000 times. She produced a state-issued ID and placed it gently on the desk. The sergeant's brows furrowed. He read it, then read it again. "Judge Talia Monroe," he said under his breath. Brenner's pen froze mid-signature. The silence that followed felt like a collapse, a vacuum sucking the air out of the room. The sergeant turned slowly. "You arrested a state judge?" Brenner blinked. "Eh, what?" But she didn't let him answer. Talia stood, straightened her blazer, and faced Brenner squarely. "You said I didn't belong in that car," she said quietly. "But the truth is, you never thought I belonged in this city. Not in that parking lot. Not driving a nice car. Not being black and composed." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. And now, for the first time since he'd clicked the cuffs shut, Officer Brenner looked afraid. Officer Brenner followed the sergeant into the hallway, his face flushed and tight with disbelief. How was I supposed to know she was a judge? He hissed. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The sergeant replied, his voice low but edged with disdain. You're supposed to verify, not profile. Brenner scoffed. Look, I had probable cause. Out-of-state plates, no visible registration. She wasn't under any legal obligation to prove ownership on the spot. The sergeant cut in. You skipped the VIN check. You escalated based on a hunch. Brenner opened his mouth, but nothing coherent came out. The walls of certainty he'd built around himself were beginning to crack. Back in the holding room, Judge Monroe sat quietly as another officer entered, a woman this time, with a respectful nod and apologetic eyes. Judge Monroe, I'm Officer Lively. We're deeply sorry. I've been asked to escort you to the captain's office. Talia stood, her composure still intact, though her wrists bore red indentations. She didn't speak as she followed Lively down the hallway, past desks and wide-eyed officers who suddenly couldn't look her in the eye. At the end of the hall, the captain, a tall black man in his early 50s, stood at the door, holding it open. Talia, he said gently. She met his eyes. James. Captain James Harlan had known Talia since law school. He didn't waste time with small talk. I've already called the city attorney, he said, once she was seated. There will be an immediate internal investigation. And Officer Brenner. She raised a hand to stop him. He shouldn't be your only focus. James tilted his head, curious. Go on. This wasn't just about one cop and a bad stop. It's about a culture that made him believe this was routine, that he'd face no consequences for humiliating someone based on skin color and assumption. James sat back, absorbing her words. Talia leaned forward, eyes sharp. If he hadn't cuffed a judge, how many more would go unnoticed? That question didn't need an answer. It already hung heavy in the air. By morning, the precinct was in controlled panic. Officer Brenner sat stiff in a chair outside the Internal Affairs office, his foot tapping out a nervous rhythm he couldn't stop. Word had spread, fast. Someone had leaked the footage. A blurry but clear enough video from a nearby surveillance camera showed Brenner handcuffing Judge Talia Monroe on the pavement, pressing her against the hood of her own car while she remained visibly calm and compliant. The audio was faint, but the aggression in his tone, the dismissiveness in his body language, it was all there. Inside the captain's office, two members of the Internal Affairs Division reviewed the early details. Captain Harlan stood by the window, silent, while one investigator spoke. We pulled Brenner's stop data from the last 18 months. He's pulled over black drivers at 4 times the rate of white drivers, despite being in a mixed demographic patrol zone. Talia stood beside the desk, arms folded, not angry, focused. The investigator continued. We also found 2 prior complaints, both dismissed quietly. One for excessive force, one for racial profiling. Harlan turned from the window. And why wasn't this flagged? The second investigator cleared her throat. The department lacks a proactive oversight system. Until now, there was no incentive to question his patterns. Talia shook her head slowly. So it's not just about Brenner. The first investigator looked up. Judge Monroe, we'd like you to file a formal complaint. We've opened a preliminary misconduct case, but your statement will carry weight. She nodded once. You'll have it before the end of the day. She didn't smile. This wasn't victory, it was maintenance. A necessary first step in holding up a broken beam before the entire house came down. Meanwhile, down the hall, Brenner's tapping stopped as his name was called. Officer Kyle Brenner, an internal affairs agent, said, You'll come with us now. The hallway was silent as he stood. And for the first time in his career, it wasn't his authority that led the way, it was the reckoning behind it. Judge Monroe sat in a private interview room inside the precinct, a plain space with no windows, only a metal table and a recorder blinking red. She adjusted the cuffs of her blazer before folding her hands neatly in front of her. The internal affairs agent across from her, Detective Rivera, pressed the record button. This is the official statement of Judge Talia Monroe regarding the incident that occurred on August 16, 3:42 p.m. involving Officer Kyle Brenner. Talia nodded once and began. I was parked at Elmwood Plaza, a public lot, where I intended to pick up groceries after court had adjourned early. I drive a 2021 black Mercedes-Benz registered in my name. I exited my vehicle and was retrieving my handbag when Officer Brenner approached and immediately demanded I step away from the vehicle. Her voice remained steady, measured. I asked the basis for his demand. He refused to answer. Instead, he accused me of stealing the car. I informed him the car was mine, offered to show ID. He ignored that. Within seconds, I was handcuffed, shoved onto the hood of my vehicle, and told I was being arrested for suspicion of theft. Detective Rivera was scribbling notes, but didn't interrupt. No Miranda rights. No attempt to verify ownership. No inquiry about who I was. Until much later, when I was already sitting in a holding room. She paused, her voice lowering slightly. It wasn't just aggression. It was assumption. He saw a black woman in a luxury car and didn't imagine someone who could be anything other than criminal. Rivera looked up. Did you resist? No, she said clearly. Not once. I've been a judge for 7 years. I've been a public defender, a prosecutor. I know how fast things escalate when black people challenge officers. She sat back, eyes unwavering. And that's the part people don't see. I complied to survive, not because I didn't know my rights. Because I did. Rivera nodded. Judge Monroe, we appreciate your honesty. Talia stood. I'm not looking for apologies. I'm looking for accountability. Outside, a storm was already brewing, and her words were the thunder that would precede it. By the next afternoon, a clip from the precinct security camera had gone viral. The video showed Officer Brenner placing Judge Talia Monroe under arrest. The footage cut just before she was taken into custody, but what it captured was damning enough. A white officer handcuffing a black woman in professional attire in broad daylight, without visible resistance, in a public lot. The hashtags came fast. Hashtag not her car, hashtag driving while black, and hashtag Judge Monroe. Local news picked it up by sunset. By midnight, it was trending nationwide. On the courthouse steps the next morning, reporters swarmed like bees. But Judge Monroe didn't hold a press conference. She walked silently into her chambers, eyes forward, robe in hand, her posture speaking louder than any microphone. It was Captain Harlan who addressed the press instead. Yes, the individual detained was Judge Talia Monroe. Yes, there is an active investigation into Officer Brenner's conduct. And yes, he said, his voice firm, this department is taking it seriously. But not everyone inside the precinct appreciated that tone. In the break room, murmurs simmered. She made it a race thing. Could have happened to anyone. She didn't say she was a judge. Brenner sat at a desk, suspended with pay, stewing. His supporters, fewer than before, circled around him with awkward solidarity. She's just trying to ruin my life, he muttered, eyes glued to the screen replaying the footage again and again. But then came the interviews. A retired black veteran who'd been pulled over by Brenner twice in 1 week. A teenage boy handcuffed on the curb while walking home from football practice because he fit the description. And then a fellow officer, anonymous, speaking on a podcast. I've watched him escalate situations that didn't need to go there, especially with black folks. We knew it. We just stayed quiet. Now, the silence was cracking, and Brenner was finally hearing voices that had been waiting far too long to be believed. Captain Harlan closed the blinds in his office and leaned back in his chair. On the desk before him was a folder, thick, uncomfortably so, labeled simply, Brenner, Kyle, Conduct Review. Across from him sat Chief Deputy Anika Fields, sent down from the state's Office of Police Accountability. Her expression was unreadable, but her message was clear. This isn't isolated, James. Your officer didn't just profile a judge. He triggered a backlog of ignored complaints and systemic oversight failures. James nodded slowly. I know. It's bigger than him. Anika tapped the folder. Then treat it like it is. Outside the office, officers moved stiffly through the hallways, their usual swagger subdued. Everyone knew something was coming. You could feel it in the clipped conversations, the side glances, the silence when Judge Monroe's name was mentioned. And then the email landed. Subject, Immediate departmental audit, commencing Monday morning. Internal Affairs. Civilian Review Board. 2 state attorneys. The works. Back in her courtroom, Judge Monroe resumed hearing cases, but things felt different. Defendants looked at her with quiet recognition, as if to say, "We saw what happened. We see you now." Even opposing counsel showed a new brand of deference, one not rooted in fear, but respect for how publicly she'd kept her dignity. That afternoon, she received a handwritten note slipped under her office door. "Thank you for not letting it go. Some of us couldn't. You did. A public defender." And just like that, it was no longer her fight alone. What began as an insult was turning into infrastructure. And Officer Brenner? He wasn't just in trouble anymore. He was the symbol of what could no longer be ignored. Officer Brenner's lawyer stood rigidly at the press podium, tie slightly askew, sweat dotting his brow. "My client made a reasonable stop based on the information available at the time," he declared. He had no knowledge of the individual's status. This was a misunderstanding, not misconduct. The statement aired on local television and was immediately dismantled on every social media platform within the hour. Judge Monroe hadn't spoken publicly, not once since the incident, but the silence only amplified her credibility. People knew. The footage spoke. The record of complaints spoke. And now, a department audit was beginning to speak louder than any legal defense. Inside the precinct, Brenner paced the interview room, his bravado cracking under the weight of formal questioning. 2 internal affairs investigators asked the same question in different ways. "Why did you assume the car was stolen?" "She didn't look nervous." "That didn't make you pause?" "What criteria did you use to establish probable cause?" Each question was a thread tugging at the hem of his authority, unraveling him stitch by stitch. Meanwhile, across town, Captain Harlan and Deputy Field stood before a projector screen filled with heat maps, color-coded by stop frequency and race. "You see it now?" Field said, gesturing to the map. Harlan nodded. "I see it. It's not just Brenner." "No, but Brenner gave us the proof we needed." That same day, Judge Monroe received a call. It wasn't from the mayor or the chief of police. It was from a local black mother. She just said, "Thank you." Monroe paused, then replied softly, "We deserve to feel safe in our own city." And for once, someone with power was doing more than apologizing. She was changing the terms of the conversation. The city council chambers were packed, press in the back, concerned residents filling every seat, and the precinct's leadership lined up like dominoes waiting to be pushed. Judge Monroe sat near the front, not as a participant, but as a witness. Her presence alone quieted the room. The mayor stepped to the podium. "We are here to discuss the findings of the preliminary audit and address the public concerns arising from the unlawful arrest of Judge Talia Monroe by Officer Kyle Brenner." Whispers rippled through the room as the audit report was projected on a large screen. The findings were worse than expected. Black drivers made up 18% of the driving population, but 62% of Officer Brenner's stops. Only 3% of those stops led to valid citations. No body cam activation in 41% of incidents involving black individuals. 2 prior misconduct complaints buried without follow-up. Then came a series of testimonies. A teenage boy described being made to sit on a curb with his hands in the air for 15 minutes. "Because my hoodie looked like someone else's." A nurse talked about being pulled over in her scrubs after a 12-hour shift, accused of stealing hospital equipment from the back seat. Every voice stacked higher and heavier against the department's silence. And Brenner? His name wasn't just a name anymore. It was a lit match. When the counsel asked Judge Monroe if she wished to speak, she stood slowly. "I am not here to condemn an individual," she said. "I am here to indict a system that protected him, that elevated him, that taught him people like me don't belong behind the wheel of a nice car." Her voice never wavered. This isn't about an apology. It's about the blueprint for what comes next. Policies, oversight, civilian power. Because if it takes being a judge to be believed, then what protection do my brothers, my neighbors, my students have? The chamber was still, not because they were afraid, because, finally, someone had said it without letting them look away. The headline hit every news outlet by sunrise. Officer Kyle Brenner terminated amid racial profiling scandal. The article detailed the internal affairs report, the audit findings, the council's public hearing, and the official notice of termination signed by both the police chief and the mayor. The final line was clear. Officer Brenner's conduct has undermined public trust and violated departmental ethics. His termination is effective immediately. Inside his apartment, Brenner sat frozen, the TV playing the story on loop. The same news vans that once chased drug busts he was proud of were now parked outside his place, waiting for a reaction. His phone buzzed, texts from old colleagues. Some short, "Damn, man." Some silent, "Just read it." No words. No one offered to stand by him. Not after the body cam reviews. Not after the audit. Not after Monroe's calm, cutting words echoed through the chamber. Meanwhile, in the courthouse, Judge Monroe walked into her chambers with a bouquet waiting on her desk. No card, just a folded piece of paper. For every black girl who's told she's too much to be respected. You were just enough. She sat down slowly, allowing herself, for the first time in days, a full breath. Captain Harlan called that afternoon. "He's out," he said simply. "It's done." Talia didn't cheer, didn't even smile. Instead, she replied, "Then let's make sure he's not replaced by another just like him." Because she knew what others were just starting to realize. Removing one bad officer doesn't fix the system. It just shows the cracks more clearly. Weeks passed. The buzz of scandal faded, but its impact didn't. The city council approved a civilian oversight board with real investigative power. Body camera activation became mandatory for all stops, no exceptions. And a new policy was introduced, bias intervention training, not just for officers, but for leadership. Judge Monroe was invited to help shape the curriculum. She didn't say yes immediately. It wasn't that she didn't care. She just didn't want to be used. But after reviewing the proposal and confirming the board had teeth, not optics, she agreed. "I'll help," she told Captain Harlan. "But only if we don't pretend this is progress. It's correction." In the precinct, the culture began to shift. Officers noticed who was watching now. New recruits asked different questions. Veterans who once shrugged off misconduct now hesitated, unsure if the old code of silence still protected them. And in morning briefings, Captain Harlan didn't just talk about procedures, he talked about purpose. "This badge doesn't give you power," he said one day. "It gives you responsibility. If that makes you uncomfortable, find a different job." Across town, Judge Monroe stood before a group of first-year law students. She didn't tell them about the arrest. She told them what came after. "When someone in power uses fear to decide who belongs," she said, "our job is not to get angry. It's to get precise, to document, to speak, to act. Because the law is only as just as those who dare to enforce it differently." A young student in the front row raised her hand. "What would you have done if you weren't a judge?" Monroe paused. "I would have done the same thing," she said softly. "But no one might have believed me." 3 months later, a mural appeared on the side of a brick building near Elmwood Plaza, the same lot where it all began. It wasn't commissioned. It just appeared. Painted in bold colors was the silhouette of a black woman in a blazer, head high, standing next to a shadowy police cruiser. Beneath it, in sweeping script, "Respect isn't given by power. It's demanded by presence." No name, no title, but everyone knew who it was. Judge Monroe passed it one morning on her way into work. She stopped, hands tucked in her coat pockets, watching a group of schoolkids take pictures in front of it. A teenage girl pointed up at the mural and said to her friend, "That's her. The one who didn't back down." Judge Monroe didn't interrupt. She just smiled faintly and kept walking. Inside her chambers, a new photograph had been added to the wall, next to her law degree and her appointment certificate. It was a still frame from that viral video. Not the moment of arrest, but the moment she stood, uncuffed, in the precinct hallway, spine straight, eyes forward. Not in defiance. In clarity. Because power doesn't always show up with flashing lights or badges. Sometimes, it walks into a courtroom, calm and unshaken, and rewrites what justice is supposed to look like. Thank you for watching. Subscribe me and hit the notification bell to not miss new stories. Bye.